Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Will DuPree.
And I'm Erin Cargile here at the NBC station in Austin, Texas. Thanks so much for joining us from wherever you are this morning.
We do appreciate that. We are going to be talking about Olympics coverage. We have promised every month to bring some sort of light to what our Next Our Nation team is doing to prepare for the Tokyo Summer Games, which have now been rescheduled for next year in Japan because of the coronavirus. We have had conversations about wanting to continue these shows for everybody, these streams, due to not only the coronavirus pandemic, but now another crisis that's gripping our country and really the world because protests have sprung up in many other countries and many other cities there. And it's over injustice that many black people here in our country feel after the deaths of a number of people, including Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, and now George Floyd in Minnesota.
Yeah, and Will, just to be completely honest with viewers who are watching us this morning, you reached out over the weekend as we were all watching this unfold here in Austin and across the country saying, do you feel it's right to move forward with our monthly Olympics show, which is slated to go on Tuesday morning? And so we had a very good discussion, you and I, and then took that to others as well who are behind the content of this show. And, and the decision was absolutely, because as we have seen over the past few days, even Olympians have very strong opinions about what's going on, and we wanted their voices to be heard as well, not to mention that the Olympics is a culmination and a gathering of folks from different countries, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. That's what makes it so amazing, and many people, as we're going to go over here in the next few minutes, you know, have expressed very strong opinions at the Olympics in terms of, you know, the very conversation that we're having here. You know, symbols that go back many, many years ago. And so we're going to be getting to all of that over the next few minutes that we spend with you.
For sure. And we want to say that much of our conversation here at the beginning of our stream will focus on the protests after George Floyd's death in Minneapolis. And his death in police custody led crowds to gather in streets pretty much in every city in America, including last night in D.C. And I want to show you all this video. You may have already seen it already, but we wanted to share it again. People were gathered peacefully just right outside the White House gates, and then all of a sudden you see people take off because military police were told to act and use force, including flashbangs, tear gas, and rubber pellets to clear the crowds quickly, and again by surprise there last night. And this action happened so that President Trump could walk outside the White House gates and over to St. John's Church, where he took photos holding a Bible in front of that church once the park there had been cleared.
Yeah, that's right. Similar protests, you know, showing solidarity have also played out for the last week now in every corner of the country, both around the world. That video from Washington, D.C., but we want to show you a video from other parts of the country right now. Protesters marching in front of the U.S. Embassy in Dublin on Monday to lend their voices to the Black Lives Matter movement. They chanted the name George Floyd, who died after a police officer used lethal force while arresting him in Minneapolis last week. Also, Australians voicing solidarity with Black Lives Matter protesters in the United States. Here is video of a group of people also gathered outside a shopping center in the western city of Perth on Monday.
And then this weekend in London, protests sparked on Sunday in solidarity, again, with American protesters. Londoners gathered at Notting Hill Gate, where there was a heavy police presence, as you see right here. And one more video to show you, this one to our neighbors to the north, up in Canada. Thousands of people took part in a rally in downtown Toronto in the streets on Saturday. This again was in protest of what organizers described as anti-black and anti-indigenous racism in their country and around the world.
Yeah, back here in the U.S., we wanted to speak to someone on the ground in Minneapolis who's part of our Next Our Nation team. That is where the protest for George Floyd began. And Will, you had a chance to talk with that reporter. We've been trying to track him down for a while because he also does an Olympics show. And so we've been wanting to bring him on the show, and no better time than now.
Again, this is going to be WGN radio anchor Ryan Burrow. He, like you said, Erin, has been covering the Olympics and sports here in our country. And he was sent to Minneapolis, not far from Chicago there, to be able to cover these protests. And we had a conversation, so I want you to listen in as we did that conversation yesterday, so take a listen. Ryan, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me. You've been in Minneapolis covering the protests, the reactions to George Floyd's death since that happened last week there in Minneapolis. Tell us what the city is like at this very moment, what you're seeing out there.
Well, it was a little bit more calm than what we saw Wednesday, Thursday, and even Friday evening. The temporary curfews were put into place, and when the Minnesota National Guard came in by the thousands, they were able to enforce that, and that really has been a success story when you look at these last few days. There has not been nearly as much looting, not been nearly as many fires, assaults. There have been more arrests, which is a good thing according to law enforcement. They were finally able to get in there and try to weed out the bad apples.
Right now, you're at the memorial that has sprung up for George Floyd. Talk about what's happening there.
Yeah, so actually where he died is right behind me. It's the Cup Foods, directly in front of the Cup Foods over there. And they've essentially been gathering for days now here at this location. It's become a growing memorial to George Floyd. Signs that say R.I.P. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace, some of the chants that we've been hearing over the last few days, and just numerous flowers and candles and people, no matter if they're white, black, gay, straight, male, female. I mean, everyone has been coming out here to pay their respects to George, but also to show a sign of unity and community. And you mentioned that George's brother, Terrence, was out here. He expressed that same sentiment, telling people, look, we don't want you out there rioting and looting. That doesn't respect his name. That doesn't change anything. And to be honest with you, you might feel bad after you've done it. It may feel good in the moment, but it won't feel good in the long run. He's calling for peace. The family, though, is also calling for the arrest of the 3 other officers who have been fired in this case. Only one to this point has been charged. That is Officer Chauvin, and he is behind bars right now, charged with 3rd-degree murder as well as manslaughter. But there were 3 other officers involved, and to this point, they have not been charged. That could be changing in a matter of days, but a lot of people are just very uneasy until that happens.
You mentioned that officer's arrest and the charges against him. What, if anything, did that change about what's happening and unfolding in the community there?
Well, it's interesting because when the charges were brought up on Friday, we actually thought that would kind of quell some of the violent protests, but that wasn't the case at all. On Friday, there were still numerous people out on the streets, well beyond curfew, setting fires, looting. And really, the National Guard, who was called in at that time, kind of fell back and let them go at it, essentially, for the night and let everything burn out. It wasn't the case the following day, but there is still a lot of unrest. There is still a lot of anger and frustration first of all, that it wasn't a 1st-degree murder charge, and second of all, that the other 3 officers have not been charged.
We have seen those images in the video of looting, violence, vandalism happening not just in Minneapolis, but all across the country really at this point. However, I want to ask you, what moments of kindness or unity have you witnessed out there today?
You know, it's kind of like night and day, and it really is night and day, because a lot of the looting, a lot of the violence would happen at night, and then during the day, people from all walks of life would come back to those looted areas with brooms in hand, with shovels, with buckets, and they would start sweeping and start cleaning. Even while some of the buildings were still smoldering, they were out there trying to clean up. They're anxious for healing to begin, this healing process. Some of them are from the community, some of them are from the outside, but they wanted to help. And really, here at this memorial, I mean, you're seeing people pray together, you're seeing people hold hands, you're seeing people worship together, and it has been a touching scene. Unfortunately, it was a horrible situation that led to this, but some of the people I've talked to really do believe that some good will come out of this in Minneapolis and perhaps around the world.
Wow, thanks, Ryan. We're so lucky to have someone there on the ground in Minneapolis from our Chicago affiliate, WGN Radio.
Yeah, and again, he said that just before we did that interview, George Floyd's brother had visited that very spot there and had shared that message. And fortunately, Ryan was able to relay that to all of us, because I know that connected with a lot of people around the country. Because we are focusing on the Olympics and talking about athletes, protest is no stranger stranger to those people, to those athletes that are competing in these sports. So we wanted to highlight a few tweets that some of the different organizations and athletes themselves have shared in the past few days, in the last week or so. So if you take a look right here, I want to show you. This is from the U.S. National Women's Team Players Association. Of course, this came on May 31st, their tweet. They have the hashtags there, Black Lives Matter, Justice for George, Justice for Breonna Taylor, Justice for Ahmaud Arbery, as well as a statement showing solidarity with this movement and this moment where they're protesting all across the country. Additionally, the Paralympic Games has shared a message on May 31st there too. It doesn't specifically state Black Lives Matter, but it does show and highlight some of the themes that are in talking about a lot of people at the moment.
I find it fascinating too, in many of these times, in times past, people have been, less less active in coming out and saying something, especially an entire Olympic organization like this, the Team Players Association, the Paralympics. But what we've seen over the last few days is nobody is staying quiet, and that's part of the deal, is not staying quiet and coming out and giving your opinion, as we've seen many Olympians do, over the course of different events that have transpired. And they do definitely have a platform, and they've got a lot of fans and a fan base and people watching them, waiting to see how they're going to react, what they're going to say, and they know that they are also putting themselves out there for criticism as well. And of course, we all know Simone Biles, the gold medal gymnast.
Perhaps the most famous gymnast in the world.
Yeah, and not saying a lot, but certainly getting a point across here in her tweet that says, "We have to do better, America." And that looked like it was on Friday. Alex Morgan, a U.S. soccer player, saying, "So sick and beyond words by the brutal police killing of George Floyd. When will all Americans be treated and respected equally, regardless of race and gender? We are yearning for true leadership and inclusivity from the top."
And finally, here's one to highlight from another gymnast, a former gymnast, Jordan Weber. She's now the women's gymnastics coach at the University of Arkansas. We have highlighted her in some of our previous Journey to Tokyo stories here at Next Door Nation. She obviously sent this statement out along with the hashtags Justice for George and Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, also, I was turning to local athletes, local Olympians training here. What are they saying right now? One of the folks I thought about was Tyrone Smith. If you've watched, one of our previous shows, I featured a story on him. He is training here in Austin because he's getting his MBA at the University of Texas at Austin right now. His wife, who's also an Olympic athlete, a pole vaulter, she lives and trains in Arkansas right now. And so he is back here in Austin because he's starting an internship for his graduate program right now. And I found out when I talked to him yesterday that he went to our city's protest in Austin on Sunday, wanted to participate in that. So we talked about that, his decision to be out there, what that was like. And then he shared with me some very personal stories, going back to when he was a child all the way up to present day, on when he felt racism firsthand. So here is Olympian long jumper Tyrone Smith.
It says that I am not a threat, and hashtag Black Lives Matter. And really the reason why I chose this message is because, just because the color of my skin, I shouldn't be perceived as a threat immediately by the police or by anyone in the neighborhood when I'm jogging, or a store owner, which all of those things I felt have happened to me in my past. So I've had experiences just like so many black people in America around race, and it's all comes from a perception of me being a threat, which I might be the nicest person that most people know. And I think what compelled me to go out was, I'm 35, and I can recall all of these names of all of these people who passed away: Sandra Bland, Tanir Rice, Trayvon Martin. It's just, and they're just ingrained in my brain. And I felt like this was a moment that I wanted to really participate in. As you see it proliferating around the nation, it's not just the hotspot of where the incident happened, but it's happening in all the major cities. I saw protests in Europe today, protests in London, in Germany, and I knew I wanted to be part of that, and to try to drive home the message that we've had enough as a nation, not just black people, but as a nation, we've had enough. And the stronger we come out in force, the the more powerful the message is, and hopefully our elected officials will start paying attention and doing some things to bring about change. In Missouri, one time in college, I was pulled over 5 nights in a row and not issued a ticket and not given a reason other than 3 black guys in a car at midnight. So it really depends on where you're living. It definitely varies from place to place. But I can say that I feel comfortable in Austin. Again, not perfect. I've been tailed by the police for a long time and been nervous and not sure what was going to happen, but I wasn't pulled over. So that could have just been coincidence, who knows. But you definitely are, your senses are heightened as a black person when the police are behind you for a little bit of time. I can't remember if it was 2nd or 3rd grade, but I'm going to go with 2nd grade. Our house caught on fire. We were living on a military base in North Carolina, and our house caught on fire. My mother woke me up in the middle of the night, grabbed me and my sisters, ran outside, and I stood there in my underwear and watched our house burn down. And we don't know what happened, but some investigators got it into their mind that I had started the fire as a second grader. I think I was 8 years old at the time, and they came to our temporary housing where they had us. They picked me and my mother up. My dad was stationed in Japan at the time. He was a Marine, and took me to the interrogation room, locked my mother outside. She's an immigrant, had no idea that she had a right to be inside. And for hours, I think it was like 6 hours, they interrogated an 8-year-old child about a house fire that he set allegedly, and then went back inside and went to sleep with his family. And I was scared out of my mind. And to this day, it still obviously affects me. And I honestly feel that they found an easy target. They interrogated me for hours until I broke and admitted to something that I didn't do. And a week later, they came and got me in and started the interrogation over because they realized, I guess through their forensic evidence, that the fire couldn't possibly have been started there. And they grilled me more and more and more. And I said, I didn't do it. I wanted to go home. And they said, well, there's going to be they literally, verbatim, there's going to be a white man who's going to go to jail if you don't tell the truth. That was my first experience. That was probably my mom's first experience with American law enforcement as well. And so you can imagine that I haven't been incredibly trusting of law enforcement since then. I know that it sounds really cliche. There's tons of research or tons of articles you can read to educate yourself and check in on your black friends because they may seem okay, but chances are they're not, your coworkers. But even beyond that, it's just time to vote for representatives who listen and who are sensitive to the causes of disenfranchised people. And I'm not asking you to change what side of the aisle that you would prefer to vote on. That's not what it's about. Republican or Democrat doesn't have anything to do with social justice. You could be fiscally conservative and still stand up for the rights of marginalized people.
Powerful, powerful message right there by Tyrone Smith. Also, he mentioned some things about his mom to explain that background there. His family is originally from Bermuda. He moved here to the U.S. as a young child, and now he's got dual citizenship, and he actually competes for his home country of Bermuda. So he's competed in the long jump for his country and is trying to qualify to do that again for Bermuda in the 2021 Olympic Games. Tyrone, he's an incredible guy, and I have really enjoyed getting to know him and following him through his journey and his training. And I'm really glad he's here in Austin, getting his MBA, and that we have the privilege of following his story.
Yeah, but what he went through.
Yeah.
Echoes what many of the people who are out there protesting are standing up and sharing their stories, very similar things that have happened to them, and they are black as well.
Yeah, the personal stories going back to his childhood, I think we need to keep hearing these stories because many people are still, not connecting with what is really happening and not believing that these things have happened.
And that's the reason why they're out there.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be detracted from, and they should be highlighted for sure. Of course, the Olympic Games are no stranger to protests actually happening at them. Particularly, we want to talk about a moment back in 1968. That was well before my time, obviously, but I've seen this image of two black athletes standing up on the winner's podium, one wearing the gold medal, one wearing the bronze medal, holding up their fists as an act of solidarity for the Black Power movement and the oppression of black people in the U.S. That moment, I'm sure, has been seen in many history books before, but we wanted to tell you a little bit about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tommy Smith, John Carlos raised a fist on the podium after medaling in the 200-meter race while the Star-Spangled Banner was being played. And according to History.com, you can, Wikipedia this morning just to get even more background, because Will and I, we weren't around, when this happened, and so we certainly can learn from history. They also stood in black-socked feet without shoes to bring attention to black poverty, beads to protest lynchings, and they raised black gloved fists in the air, represented their solidarity and support with black people and oppressed people around the world, choosing that moment up on the medal stand to make that statement.
Yeah, and it did cost them some backlash. Both of them were suspended from the U.S. team, and the Australian who finished second in that was also, he never competed in the Olympics again, despite qualifying multiple times for the Australian Olympic team. He stood in solidarity and wore a badge in support of what their message was.
Yeah, and Dr. John Carlos said you see far more athletes stepping up now in the name of social justice, and said, quote, "I sit back and smile with pride and say they are the fruit of my labor." And now Dr. John Carlos, he travels the U.S. Talking to all kinds of groups. They've devoted their lives to this, since 1968.
Yeah, and recently our sister station, WDBM, caught up with Dr. John Carlos when he went to a high school to talk to some student athletes. Let's hear what he had to say.
Trying to inspire someone to make them feel confident enough that you can stand for what's right, and you don't have to stand back and tolerate certain things when you know emotionally, spiritually, it's affecting you.
And again, take a look here just in a second. That's the image that, is emblazoned in a lot of people's minds from that Olympic Games, those two athletes raising their fists in solidarity with the Black Power movement and the oppression of black people in the U.S.
Yeah, and I recall during the last Olympics, there's always something that people are talking about, something athletes are doing, and prior to Olympians doing it, we led into that last Olympic Games with the Star-Spangled Banner and the kneeling, and that was the big conversation, going into the last Olympic Games, and how are athletes going to react, what were they going to do, and so a very, similar conversation happening at that time too, as well.
And that act of protest was to highlight what we're talking about at this very moment all across the country, is police brutality and the treatment of black people by law enforcement. Additionally, we want to talk about the health crisis happening in this country and around the world. The coronavirus pandemic is still happening. It's still getting people sick, and it's still killing people here in the U.S. and around the earth. So we wanted to highlight a comment recently. This weekend, the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, advised anyone who was protesting in her city this past weekend to get tested this week for COVID-19, because again, that pandemic is still getting people sick at this point. And with people gathering in such large crowds, some wearing masks, you see video of people doing that, but not keeping much distance, that still raises the risk of getting sick from coronavirus. Yeah,
I was out covering the protest here in Austin this past weekend, and it was almost like, coronavirus, what's that, out the window? Some people were wearing masks, others weren't. They're shoulder to shoulder, walking down the street, and things almost changed in an instant as the focus shifted, to the bigger issue at hand. But our numbers here in Austin, or in Texas rather, we had a huge jump over the weekend, and of course, as the symptoms take a while to kick in, and so who knows what we're going to see in the next few days. But we want to show you the latest numbers from the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Right there, 6 million, more than 6 million confirmed cases, 373,000 plus deaths, 216 countries right now affected, still still affected by COVID-19. The U.S. has the most cases and deaths anywhere in the world. Of course, this being very important as well to the conversation we're having here about the Olympics and the issue of people gathering as different cities and states try to figure out what that is going to look like for them over the next few months. The long-term conversation is, what is it going to look like for the Olympics? And we had that conversation at our last live digital show here. We had a doctor on, a medical expert, talking about what the probability of that is going to be, which is still very much in the air. Also, side note, I know a lot of people are probably watching, and we're saying Japan 2021,
right.
The 2021 Olympics. The logo is not changing, by the way. Japan 2020 is still going to be what the U.S. Olympic Committee is going to use, because all of the signs were already made and created and posted and are up, in Tokyo right now. So they're sticking with 2020, even though we all know it's going to be 2021
next year. Yeah.
When and if we do go to Tokyo and cover the Olympics. So I just wanted to interject that if you're watching and commenting about why are you still saying Japan 2020. So there you go.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, but here we are with it. Erin, you did touch on that. We talked to some medical experts about the coronavirus pandemic and ways to try to curb that. They have highlighted over and over again that it's going to take even more testing, really ramped up that. Also, contact tracing. That's an important piece of it. So I talked to Dr. Stephen Thomas. He is the chief of infectious disease at Upstate University Hospital in Syracuse, New York. He joined us last month, and I had a conversation with him last week to kind of revisit things and asked him where things stood. And we're going to play a portion of that interview talking about contact tracing, why it's important, and how it works. Let's listen.
It typically works where someone who has symptoms that could be consistent with infection, they come to a medical provider. The medical provider will evaluate them and they will test them. And while that person is being tested and while they are awaiting testing, they should be isolating themselves. So they should be physically distancing themselves from others, even within the home, to the best extent possible. Once that test comes back positive, then local departments of health take that information, they engage that patient, and they find out over a day or two prior to the testing who they were in contact with. So contact meaning, within 6 feet of somebody for more than 10 minutes. And then those people then are contacted, they're interviewed, they ask them how they feel, they ask them how whether they've been tested or not, and then those people are given guidance to quarantine for 14 days. So the idea being that you have these, I kind of think of it as a forest fire in a way, where the small little fires, if you can put them out when they are small fires, so the fire in this case, of course, is transmission of the virus between people. If it's a small fire, it's easier to put out. The problem is when you have multiple small fires that then coalesce into a big fire that you're unable to control. And so in this case, a big fire would be lots and lots of transmission, lots of people getting infected, and then overwhelming the healthcare system. And so contact tracing is a key and essential part of keeping those fires small, because you basically take people who are potentially infected and you quarantine them away from other people who may be susceptible to infection. And if you can do that on a very large scale, like other places have been able to do, China was able to do that on the latter half of their epidemic. Singapore has been able to do that. South Korea was able to do that. If you can do that on a large scale, then you're able to reduce transmission to the point that certainly you can take care of people and not overwhelm your healthcare system, but you also have an opportunity potentially to stop transmission.
How would you evaluate the country and all the states in it, their ability to contact trace at this point?
Yeah, so in general, I guess the general theme of this, and I'm not the first to discuss this, is that I think the departments of health nationally, there really has not been the level of investment and resources that they require to do their job most effectively. And I think that that was sort of always the case, but now with COVID and the pandemic and the epidemic within the United States, those departments of health have undergone a very significant pressure test. And at least on my observation and the people I talk to and what I read, the Department of Health they're doing the best that they can, and these people are working incredible hours and doing the best that they can, but they're just not properly resourced, and so they're kind of failing that pressure test in some areas. So you need, the bottom line is you need resources, you need money, you need people, and you need the tools to do proper public health. And unfortunately, they, I believe, are in general under-resourced to do that.
Dr. Stephen Thomas there again with Upstate University Hospital in the New York State area. Another part of our conversation centered on whether he thought or could evaluate if large events like the Olympics or even college football games could be held at this point, and he said no. Plain and simple, no. It's just not healthy for people.
Yeah, and last time we talked to him as well, so we appreciate him coming on twice for us, but he didn't believe the Olympics will or should happen until there's a vaccine, and he said that will take at least 18 months, and that was a good guess. That's a quick turnaround, but then even at that point, having enough of that vaccine is still an issue. So I'm not getting a great feeling, Will, about the Olympics in the future.
And Dr. Thomas, he said that Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease doctor for the country, who we've seen a lot of on television recently, Dr. Fauci had said that it's possible a vaccine could be ready by December. And so I asked Dr. Thomas about that. I said, is that possible? Do you think so? And he said there is a high probability of that happening. But here's the other part. So the vaccine could be ready, but then manufacturing it, dispersing it, and setting up vaccination programs for, every city, county, state, country in the world is a whole other thing. That's a whole other mountain to climb, which makes it and pushes it to making it available to everybody, 18 months away. Yeah. That's why there's that wait, that lag.
Yeah, makes a year not seem like very much time to accomplish all of that. Also, as I look at my calendar and schedule things over the next few weeks and months, things keep popping up that say fly to Tokyo, or this competition is happening right now, the qualifier for the Olympics, and I'm just going delete because
it's not happening.
Yeah, I hadn't gone through my calendar and deleted everything Olympics related. So here we are. Yeah, June we'd be getting ready to go to the Olympics next month. Of course, all of that postponed now. And Will, I'm really glad that we had this conversation today, that we went forward with the show centered around what is happening in our country right now, the unrest. Exciting to see other countries coming together in solidarity for the United States right now. And as I mentioned right before we started the show, the Olympics is about bringing together countries from all over the world, bringing together people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, that melting pot of diversity all in one place. And even though people are extremely competitive, they're also, supporting each other, cheering each other on. And that is really what we need to do, all of us right now.
For sure. So we want to say thank you all for watching. You may have questioned why we did this, but I hope that you gained some context about kind of what's happening around the world in response to not just the protests and unrest that have come because of that, additionally, where we stand now with the coronavirus pandemic, since it is far from over at this point. So we say thank you.
Thank you, guys, and hopefully we'll see you right here back next month. We do this the first Tuesday of every month, and we sure do appreciate you spending time out of your morning to be with us.
All right, Erin, thanks so much for being here and talking with me.
Thank you, Will.
Appreciate that. We'll see you back here next month, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay safe.